Yo, welcome back everyone. Today I just want to talk to you about factoring perfect squares completely with the greatest common factor. Part 3. Final part, by the way. I know we've been looking at this, we've been talking about this now for a while. This is going to be the last part. This is pretty much how it will look on the Regents when we get to the later problems, so it won't get harder than this, which is good. Keep in mind when we talk about factoring completely, guys, whether it's a perfect square, whether it could be a perfect square, it could be a trinomial, whenever you factor completely, you always factor twice. Always, okay? The only thing you got to figure out, do you start with two sets of parentheses, or in this case, and like we talked about today as well, do you start with the GCF? And that's what we're going to look at right now, right? Finding the GCF. And guys, when you find the greatest common factor, if there is one, then you always start with one set of parentheses, okay? And then like we did today, you divide both terms by the GCF. And then steps 3 to 6, again, are just factoring the perfect square rules like we have been working with during the week, all right? Setting up two parentheses, minus sign on the right, plus sign on the left, and then just finding the square roots, all right? So that's pretty much what we got. Now, like today, we talked about finding the numerical GCF with a calculator, so we'll go over that as well. Okay, but we talk about the buttons today. The buttons are math, hit the right arrow, hit 9, and you put in numbers. So just for a quick review, let's say we wanted the GCF for, I don't know, let's take a look. Math, right arrow, you hit number 9, notice GCD comes up, and I want the GCF for 18, 50. GCF is 2, all right? So you could always find the numerical GCF with the calculator, guys. Keep that in mind. And please, if you haven't done so, please, I keep saying this, but I'm going to keep saying it. TI-84 Plus. Guys, you can download this to your computer. It's free. I put the link in the description below. Take advantage of it. It's free. Download it right to your computer, and it pops up just like it pops up on my computer, and you can do everything with it. Okay, so let's get into this here. Now, before we start factoring, I just want to do a quick review, guys, of dividing monomials, because this is going to come up while we factor. And the rule is this: when dividing monomials, always subtract exponents. So what do I mean by that? Well, guys, if you're dividing x to the third divided by x to the first, remember, subtract exponents. Even though there's no 1 here, it's invisible. If it makes you feel better, you could always put a little 1 in there. When dividing x to the third divided by x to the first, you keep the variable, subtract exponents. 3 minus 1 is x squared. Simple, right? It's the opposite of multiplying. You add exponents. When dividing, you always subtract exponents. So real quick, let's say you had y to the third divided by y to the first. That is always y to the second. We're going to be using that a lot today, guys. And then, of course, you could have the same thing where it's x divided by x. Keep in mind, when they're exactly the same, they cancel out, and you are left with 1. We'll be using both of these situations today while we factor, all right? So once again, when dividing monomials, always subtract exponents. Let's see what this is going to look like, guys. This really is super easy, okay? It says factor completely. That means we're going to be factoring twice, as always, like we've been talking about. Now, notice, I said this today, is, it is a binomial and there is a minus sign. And you do see a 4 here, so you might be thinking, oh, it's a perfect square, but keep in mind, x to the third, guys, is not a perfect square, and neither is x to the first. So this cannot be factored with 2 sets of parentheses. That is why we need to find our GCF, greatest common factor. Now here's the thing, notice there's no number or coefficient in front of the x to the third, therefore there's going to be no numerical GCF at all. Whenever there's really an invisible 1 here. Whenever you have that, that means there's no numerical GCF. But what do you notice, though, in these terms? You have x to the third and you have x to the first. Whenever you have an x in both terms, x is going to be the GCF here. It's always the smaller value variable, always. X to the third, x to the first. Which one's smaller? The x. And that's always going to be our GCF. So what did we do today? We pulled out the GCF, and whenever you're factoring with the GCF, guys, the greatest common factor, you always open 1 parenthesis. And then what did we do today? We brought the GCF up and we divided. And what we do to one term, guys, we always do to the other. Now this is where our dividing monomials comes in. X to the third divided by x to the first is always x to the second, always. Minus sign comes down. Here, x's are exactly the same, so they cancel out. Now, I'm not going to write a 1 here because, guys, what number is that? 4. That comes down. And then you close parentheses. Now, normally you would be finished, but because it says factor completely, guys, you factor twice. Now looking at this is a perfect square binomial because x squared is a perfect square, and so is 4, and you have your minus sign. Well, guys, how do we factor all perfect squares? We know that's when we set up 2 sets of parentheses. And now you go through the steps, minus to the right. First sign's a plus. This is easy now for you guys. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 4 is dos. And of course, your GCF of x comes down. So your final answer, guys, x times x plus 2 times x minus 2. Done. That's how you factor completely. Simple. Let's look at another one. Notice I have no coefficient here, guys. That means there's going to be no numerical GCF. So your greatest common factor, guys, is going to be when you have x to the third and x to the first, it's going to be x. That you can't use your calculator for. That you have to know. Okay? So you pull out x, open one parenthesis, bring your x up and divide, guys. You always divide by the GCF, always. X to the third divided by x to the first is x squared. Minus comes down. X's here are the same. When you divide, they cancel. And your 49 comes down. The minute you write this, you should know this is your perfect square. Well, how do we factor all perfect squares? You guys know by now, 2 sets of parentheses. Minus goes to the right as always. Plus sign to the left as always with perfect squares. Square root of x squared is x. The square root of 49 is 7. And of course, your GCF of x comes down. Boom. And there you go. Let's do another one. X to the third minus 36x. Once again, the same thing. And I know they're the same, guys. I'm just getting you used to the rules and the steps. We'll get harder in a little bit. GCF is x. So we pull out x. Whenever you pull out the GCF, guys, you always open one parenthesis. Bring your x up and divide both terms. X to the third divided by x to the first is always x to the second minus. X's here cancel. 36 comes down. Now you're looking at a perfect square. Well, we know how to factor that. We'll go green. Do some Christmas colors, right? Christmas is on the way. 2 sets of parentheses. Minus goes to the right. First sign's a plus. The square root of x squared, guys, is x. Square root of 36 is 6. And of course, your GCF of x comes down. And there you go. Last one of these. Once again, no coefficient in front, but you do have an x in both terms. Therefore, your GCF is x. Pull out x, open one parenthesis, bring your x up to divide. X to the third divided by x to the first, you subtract, is always x to the second. 3 minus 1 is 2. Minus comes down. X's here cancel. 64 comes down. We are looking at perfect squares, ladies and gentlemen, and as always, 2 sets of parentheses. Don't worry, next week we're going to get into factoring trinomials, so we're going to change things up a bit. Minus goes to the right when you have a perfect square. First sign's always a plus with a perfect square. The square root of x squared is x and x. Square root of 64 is 8 and 8. And then, of course, your GCF of x comes down. Now, that's too easy, guys. And although, listen, I have seen this, I have seen that on the Regents. But let's now look at what you will most likely see on the Regents, okay? And that's going to be numbers and variables together. For example, here's a perfect Regents question. How do I know? Because I copied it. So it's 3x to the third minus 27x, all right? So guys, now your GCF is going to have a number and the letter with it, okay? So you have to keep that in mind. It's not just a number and it's not just a letter. Here's why. You have, I don't know why that happened. Hold on. You have a number in both terms, and you have an x in both terms. Now, when you have 3 and 27, the GCF is 3, okay? And you also have an x to the third, x to the first. That means x is also part of the GCF. So the GCF now is 3x. So pull out 3x and open parentheses. And now listen, if you didn't know that 3 was the GCF, what could you do? You go hit math, you go to the right, you hit number 9, and then you put 3 comma 27, and you will get 3. And we'll practice that in a second. So now, like always, with the GCF, guys, you open one parenthesis, bring the 3x up, and divide. And what we do to one term, we always do to the other. It's not harder, guys. It's just extra things you have to divide. You can divide 3 by 3. You know they cancel out. X to the third divided by x to the first, we've drilled that in enough now. We know that's x squared minus. Here you have numbers. Do them first. 27 divided by 3, guys, is 9. You know when x divided by x, they're exactly the same, they cancel. So you don't put an x here. It's 9. Now, normally you're finished, but you know x squared minus 9, guy, is always a perfect square. This is where your 2 parentheses come in, and now it's factored just like we always do. Minus to the right for perfect squares, first sign's a plus. Square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 9 is 3 and 3, and your GCF of 3x comes down. When you see this on a Regents or any standardized test, guys, it won't get harder than that when you're dealing with factoring into perfect squares, all right? Now, let's say you're looking at this one, and you don't know what the GCF is. No problem. So we go to our calculator. We hit the math button. We hit the right arrow. You can scroll down to 9. I like to just hit 9. It takes you right there. And your calculator says GCD. You put 4, comma, 36, and you hit enter. And who's the GCF? GCF is 4. So there you go. Guys, your calculator will always give it to you. All right? So use the calculator. That's why we want it. So the GCF is 4. And notice you have an x to the third and x to the first. That means an x goes with the GCF. So the GCF is 4x. So pull out 4x. And whenever you're factoring with the greatest common factor, guys, you always open one parenthesis at first. Now bring your 4x up and divide. That's why we practiced that before. 4 divided by 4, they cancel. X to the third divided by x is x squared. Minus 36 divided by 4. Boom. And of course, x divided by x cancels. And you close parentheses. Now we know, right from this stage on, you have a perfect square, no problem. 2 sets of parentheses. As always. Minus sign to the right, as always with perfect squares. First sign's a plus with perfect squares. Perfect squares, signs are always different. Square root of x squared is always x. The square root of 9 is always 3. And of course, the GCF of 4x comes down. 4x times x plus 3 times x minus 3. Boom. Next, greatest common factor. If you said 4, you were correct. And if you said x, you were correct. 4 goes into 16, x to the third and x to the first. You always take the smaller variable, so that's x. So you have 4x. Pull out 4x, open one parenthesis, bring your 4x up to divide. Both terms. What we do to one term, guys, we always do to the other when we're factoring with the GCF. 4's cancel, you get x squared minus 16 divided by 4 is 4. Here your x's cancel. You're looking at a perfect square, guys. Well, we know what to do with perfect squares. 2 sets of parentheses. Minus to the right. First sign's a plus. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 4 is 2. And your GCF of 4x comes down. How many colors do you see, guys? You see 2. Why do you see 2 colors? Because how many times did I factor? I factored twice. Whenever you factor completely, guys, you factor twice. Last one and we're done. Greatest common factor. 2x. Pull out 2x. And again, if you didn't know 2 is the greatest common factor, guys, you go to your calculator, math, write 9, 2, 18, enter. Open one parenthesis for the greatest common factor, guys. Divide here. What we do to one term, we always do to the other. 2's cancel. Whoops. X to the third divided by x to the first is always x squared minus x is cancel. 18 divided by 2 is 9. All right, and now 2 sets of parentheses. Minus to the right, first sign's a plus. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 9 is 3. And guys, your GCF of 2x just comes down. And that's it. Guys, that is factoring the difference of 2 squares completely, which means whenever you factor completely, you always factor twice. All right? So that's basically it for this. Guys, if you have any questions for me, please email me. My email is in the description below. Please download the calculator. That is also in the description below. Comment, guys, on what you liked, what you didn't like. If you absolutely hated this, definitely let me know that. Subscribe, like, and share. Let me know if there's anything you want to see. And as always, guys, more important than anything, please stay safe to you, your family, and your friends. And I will see you guys on the next lesson. Have a great day.